Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's podcast, I wanted to talk about the two Asian giants, India and China, and more specifically, what would happen if the two giants were able to resolve their border disputes and trade imbalances and work together for the benefit or the mutual benefit of both countries and the people of those countries. This is something I've often thought about, and I frequently say to my son, if India and China can get together, what does it say about their standing in the rest of the world? Or what are the ramifications for the rest of the world should these two Asian superpowers suddenly work together? Uh, let's look at there's a few aspects of this relationship that I'd like to delve into. Um, so first and foremost, they're both ancient cultures. Both the Indian civilization as well as the Chinese civilization are some of the foremost ancient cultures uh, on the planet. So they have thousands of years of history of trading together and of dialogue between the two countries, as well as trade interactions and communication and that type of thing. So there is a precedent for a harmonious relationship between the two Asian countries. Uh, let's take a look at the population. So as of 2026, India's population is estimated to rise to 1.47 billion, and the Chinese population is estimated at rising to 1.413 billion. That gives us a collective total population of 2.88 billion people, which accounts for just over a third of the entire world population. That's between 35 and 36% of the entire population of the world. Now, have a think about that, because two countries having over a third of the world's population, and both these countries getting on, trading together, sharing intelligence, sharing trade, communication, the, the, the partnership can only strengthen, and they can, there's no ceiling to the meteoric rise that would follow, uh, a union between these two countries. Now you add Russia to the mix, because I know people often talk about the RIC, the Russia, India, China nexus. That takes the population up to 37%. And, you look at the natural resources that these countries have, they, they're fairly self-contained units. And if I was sitting on the other end of the world, I would be really, really alarmed at the prospect of indeed India and China getting together, but God forbid Russia joining that nexus, because it would throw such a spanner in the works, and it would disrupt the global hegemony as it stands today. Not to say that there's no disruption going on as we speak. In fact, I would wager that the current situation between the United States and what's going on with the rest of the world is an empire that is scrambling to retain its hegemony at any cost. Now, just imagine a powerful China and a powerful India, but not only powerful, but the fact that they both work together, that would spell doom for any emerging power anywhere else on the globe. Now, let's look at both these countries' militaries. India has approximately 1.5 million personnel, combined personnel, and with reserves amounting to around 900,000 personnel, whilst China has the world's largest by active size military with approximately 2.035 million personnel and approximately 510 reservists. Let's move on to the economies of both these countries. India currently has the fourth largest economy. Some say the third. However, depends on how you look at it or how you measure it. With approximately $4.5 trillion worth, and it's got an annual growth projection of 7.4%. China, on the other hand, is the world's second largest economy. Some would argue they've already surpassed the United States. However, they have an economy worth $20.6 trillion. They do have, economists are highlighting that their Chinese economy is slowing down. However, the growth is slowing down. It's still at a remarkable 4.2%. I think when we're looking at the comparison, it's important for us to look at the political structure of both these countries as well. India is a vibrant democracy. In fact, it's the world's largest democracy. However, I'd like to stress that that amounts for nothing in terms of, you know, the friends that you have on the world stage, and you know, those that are willing to come to your assistance. Because as history, or recent history, I'd say the last 100 years or so worth, or even before that, 200 years, you've seen that the friends that India has had on the world stage are few and far between. You know, the two I can name off at, you know, without batting an eyelid are, well, the old Soviet Union, which is currently Russia, and Israel. You know, two battle-tested allies that have been there on India's side through thick and thin. All you've got to do to understand the point I'm making is that even though India is a democracy and it's the largest democracy, one would think that countries like the United States would automatically pivot towards India because of the shared values. However, that is not the case. You know, if you look at the recent events of Pahalgam, the massacre in Pahalgam last year, carried out by Pakistani terrorists who were sent in by the ISI, you found that India, you know, the world response was fairly muted. Also, you had, the IMF granting Pakistan another bailout, which they knew a lot of that money would go back into the military component, and then some of that money would be siphoned off to fund the jihadist networks that would then cross over into occupied Jammu and Kashmir and cause problems for Indian civilians in India. And you also had President Donald Trump, rewarding Field Marshal Asim Munir. You know, he became Trump's favorite field marshal. And who can forget, Shehbaz Sharif's really, really pitiful groveling at Trump's feet when he nominated President Trump for the second or third or whatever time for the Nobel Peace Prize. I felt sorry for the Pakistanis having seen their leader behave in such a manner on the world stage. It was utterly shameful and disgraceful. But put that all aside, you've had, as I say, you've got the largest democracy, but not a lot of support coming in from what would theoretically be really solid, or should theoretically be really solid allies. Uh, if you look at you look at what this United States Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick said last year sometime. He just doesn't understand, you know, India's reliance on Russia, especially for arms, and the trade that they do. Here's a man who's appointed to a position of seniority within a government, but has absolutely no clue of the history, his own country's history, let alone what they've done. In terms of their relationship with India. Uh, it's absolutely strange. It was so shocking to hear him. It was almost patronizing in a way, where he says he goes. He's got a lot of Indian friends, and he goes to their homes and he spends a lot of time with them. However, the Indian government, this and that. It's if he just has to go back in history and see that when India had adopted a non-aligned stance, the Americans had imposed sanctions on India, and they were not allowed to acquire any military aid from the United States, uh, to purchase any weaponry, and they at the same time were funding and arming this Pakistan, knowing full well that those arms would be used against India. So you basically saying, you're not allowed. I'm not allowed to sell you anything. Nobody's allowed to sell anything to you. You cannot defend yourself. But to make matters worse, I'll even give arms to the people that want to harm you, and you should be happy with that. Now, for a man that's the Secretary of Commerce, you would have thought that he would have had a little bit of more common sense to have done some digging into the history to understand why it is that this partnership does exist. They were basically pushed into that partnership. Then you look at during the Bangladesh War of Independence, when Henry Kissinger and Nixon sent the USS Enterprise into the Bay of Bengal to threaten the Indians, because they didn't want India interfering in the genocide that was being perpetrated by the West Pakistanis on the what were then East Pakistanis, or later became Bangladesh. Uh, you know it it's sad that he's unaware of this history, or he chooses not to accept it, because these types of coercive methods did not work. Once the Soviets dispatched their nuclear fleet, the Americans had to pull out of the Bay of Bengal with their tail between their legs. So there is a lot of distrust within the Indian community uh, regarding the United States and what it has done. I keep going back to when Henry Kissinger said that to be an enemy of the United States is bad, but to be a friend is even worse, or something along those lines. I paraphrase. Um, anyway, I digress. That's an episode on its own, just dealing with how Bangladesh came about. India does have a lot of regulations in place, especially on trade. And I think if you want your economy to grow, you need to be able to relax some of those regulations in order to get that investment coming in. Uh, so it helps open up the economy. Now, China, on the other hand, politically speaking, well, they started off, under after the Second World War, when Chairman Mao assumed power. They were a communist country. They flirted a bit with capitalism in the two zones that they had initially opened under Deng Xiaoping. But they've also, I'm probably going to receive a bit of flack for this, but they also are an expansionist regime. And the reason I say that is, just ask the Tibetans. They'll be able to tell you more about it. But China seems to have border issues regarding, territorial issues with not just India, but with Japan, with the Philippines, with Russia, and the list goes on. So there is an element of expansionism somewhere in there. Now, some might say that they're trying to protect their borders because they're continuously being challenged by the Americans, and at the end of the day, having all these border issues and claiming this sea, and it's you start coming off as a bully. And nobody likes a bully. Just look at the way the American presidency is moving at the moment. They, you know, I, I I presume they can count the number of friends they have, or possibly, let alone one hand, probably on two fingertips. Uh, the Chinese government the regime is also quite a repressive regime, because to control that number of people and not have a democracy in place involves quite a bit of surveillance, quite a bit of getting people to toe the line, uh, and it is quite repressive. Communist regimes tend to be repressive. So, putting all that aside, if tomorrow the Indians and Chinese settled their border dispute and had a much more amicable relationship, what would it look like moving forward? Uh, could it be something better not only for Asia but for the rest of the world as well? The question here is, can or are the Chinese prepared to put up with another rising power in their midst, right on their doorstep? Are they in a position to accept that they are a superpower in that region, but their neighbor is an aspiring superpower as well, and that the both can coexist peacefully? If that can be achieved, I suspect that things in that region would be a lot more stable. However, I also suspect that because of the threat the Chinese pose and the possible threat the Indians would pose in the future, having used the Chinese example as as a roadmap to where India could be, the Americans have been taking note, and that's why I suspect there's been all this turmoil in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, because the Americans are not only cutting out China from the equation. They're slowly driving a wedge between the Pakistanis and the Chinese, the Bangladeshis and the Chinese. Uh, but if you think about it, it serves two purposes. One, to contain China, and two, should they need, they can always turn those two satellite vassals of theirs against India as well. There's no love lost between them, as recent politics has shown. So, my takeaway from this is that the Chinese and the Indians should sit down, resolve their border issue, get trade going, and come to a consensus that the both can coexist as mighty powers in the region, which would be beneficial for both their countries and at the same time for the entire region. Uh, I know that if you're sitting on other parts in other parts of the world, it sounds scary because there will be a shift of power. I think that's an inevitability. When you read Sir John Glubb's I think it's The Decline of Empires. He maps out the strategic rise, maintenance, and eventual collapse of empires. And you know I'm not saying the American empire is collapsing or I'm saying it's an inevitability. When it does happen, if you have two strong powers that are able to fill that vacuum, a lot of the turmoil and chaos that comes with the collapse of an empire can be mitigated. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to this podcast. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us with the algorithm and it helps us to get our channel recognized and grow. Once again, thank you very much. See you on the next episode.